Hey, Kayla.
Good to see you, Grant.
Good to see you too.
Welcome to your first lesson. In this video, we'll be covering some essentials when it comes to fly fishing. We'll be breaking down the rod, reel, line, leader, tippet, and some basic flies. But first, let's dive into what we discussed in our last video. What is fly fishing? Fly fishing at its most basic level is a type of fishing that uses an artificial imitation of what fish eat instead of using bait or lures. You can do it anywhere fish live, from freshwater rivers, streams, lakes, and even neighborhood ponds, to fly fishing in saltwater at the beach, in the marsh, and even offshore. Fly fishing is a great way to catch freshwater species like trout, bass, panfish, and carp. And in the salt, you can catch species like striped bass, redfish, tarpon, marlin, and even sharks. Like we discussed last time, a fly rod is designed to cast in a unique way. It casts the weight of the fly line rather than the weight of a lure. In fact, fly rods are made to cast a very specific weighted fly line.
Hey, Kayla, I'm still a little bit confused about the weight of the line. I know we talked about it yesterday, but I still fully don't understand.
That's totally fine. It's a lot of information to take in, but essentially the weight of the rod and the weight of the line are both matched. So this is a 7-weight rod, this is a 7-weight line.
So you pair the number on the rod with the number on the line?
Exactly. Fly lines and fly rods range from 0 weight, which is the lightest, to a 15 weight, which is one of the heaviest. The smaller the weight number, the lighter the rod. Some of the most common rods are in the 4 to 7 weight range. But here's a quick reference guide to rod weights. 0 to 3 weight for small creeks, small flies, usually for small trout or panfish. 4 weight, used mostly for dry fly trout fishing and some small warm water species. 5 weight, by far the most common and versatile rod weight, used for trout and many warm water species. 6 weight, another versatile choice used for larger flies and bigger trout, but also for carp, bass, and some small saltwater species. 7 to 8 weight, probably the most common rod weights for larger species like trout, salmon, steelhead, carp, and bass. And in saltwater, you can catch species like redfish, speckled trout, sheep's head, bonefish, and more. 9 weight, arguably the most popular weight for medium-sized saltwater targets, especially permit and large bonefish. 10 weight, suitable for permit and windy conditions, small tarpon, snook, roosterfish, jack crevalle, and more. 11 to 12 weight, the most common choices for tarpon, large snook, giant trevally, and some smaller blue water species like mahi-mahi and tuna. 13 weight and up, used mostly for billfish and large pelagic species. So look at this. So like I showed you yesterday, we have the rod, a reel, fly line, and do you see this different color line? That's called backing. Typically with fly line, it's around 90 to 100 feet, but some fish can strip out way more line than that, so that's why we need backing, just in case. Well, let's get you casting this fly rod. Remember how I said the fly line is weighted?
Yeah.
That's because the fly line is typically weight forward. So the most concentrated section is going to be the closest to where your flies are tied onto, and that's called a shooting head. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And lastly, at the end of the fly line, we attach a leader. There's a monofilament for floating flies and a fluorocarbon for sinking flies. And then at the last section where our fly's attached, that's known as a tippet. When you break it down like that, it's easy to see each of the components of a fly rod setup. From your backing, to the fly line, to the leader, to the tippet. Each of these pieces work together to ensure you can entice the fish into eating your fly and safely land them. Hey Grant, let's give you a break and take a look at my fly box.
Sure.
Now that we know the basic components of a fly rod setup, let's talk about flies. At the most basic level, there are 2 categories of flies. Flies that are fished at the surface of the water and flies that are fished below the surface of the water. Flies that imitate bugs at the surface of the water are often referred to as dry flies. The most common way to fish these kinds of flies is to allow them to drift naturally, just the way a real bug would if it were riding down the current of a river.
So dry flies are good for trout?
Yeah, and bluegill and bass, pretty much any fish that eats a bug on the top of the water will eat a dry fly.
Cool.
So, if flies that are fished at or above the surface of the water are called dry flies, surprise, there's another fly category called wet flies. Wet flies come in 2 basic varieties. One that imitates bugs, which are in the stage of their life cycle where they move from the bottom of a body of water to the surface. This category of flies are often called nymphs and emergers. Another category of wet flies imitates bait fish. These flies are called streamers.
So that's what you were using yesterday.
Yes, a streamer essentially is just an imitation of a bait fish. You can fish for bass, pike, muskie, and even some aggressive saltwater species. It's one of my favorite flies to throw. Another favorite is a popper. The whole goal is to make a bunch of noise in the water, and if you're lucky, you can get an explosive eat.
That sounds pretty awesome. Can we go throw that tonight?
Honestly, it's getting a bit dark, but let's do this. I gotta hook you up with my friend. He works at the local fly shop, and he's a certified casting instructor with FFI.
I've never even been to a fly shop before.
Well, let's change that tomorrow. His name's Austin. He will get you everything you need for our first day on the water.
Thank you, let's do it.
Fly fishing can be pretty intimidating at first. There's a lot of moving parts, and without proper guidance, you can get easily lost. Grant is just starting to get the basics of fly fishing down, but there's no better way to learn than using the resource of a fly shop. In the next episode, we'll be exploring a local fly shop and introducing you to one of FFI's certified casting instructors. If you want to learn the basic mechanics of fly fishing, click that next video. We'll see you there.